I've never told anyone about the night I got stranded with my best friend's father. Not because nothing happened, but because I'm still not sure if I survived it. My name is Nora. I'm 27, living in a renovated loft in Portland, Oregon, where the rain comes in sheets 6 months of the year and you learn to stop waiting for the sun. I work as a freelance copywriter, mostly wellness brands, sustainability startups, the kind of clients who use words like intentional and grounded. It pays well enough that I can work from my desk by the window, watching the city blur behind water-streaked glass. My life's been small by design. Quiet. Controlled. I had a boyfriend once, back when I was 24. We lasted 8 months before he told me I was emotionally unavailable. He said it like it was a diagnosis. I didn't argue. I've got walls, and I've never apologized for them. My therapist says I confuse restraint with safety. Maybe she's right. But I've survived this long by not letting people close enough to prove it. Before I go any further, if you're the kind of person who thinks about the moments that changed you, the ones you can't explain out loud, hit that subscribe button. This story doesn't get easier to hear. But maybe you need to hear it anyway. Like, comment if you've ever felt like you left a part of yourself somewhere you can't go back to. Let's talk about it in the comments. And share this if you know someone who needs to hear a story about the versions of us that only exist when everything else falls away. My best friend Sloane, though, she's the opposite. She's 28, works in event planning, the kind of person who throws dinner parties for 12 on a Tuesday and somehow makes it look effortless. She's always pulling me into things I don't have the energy for, last-minute road trips, crowded art openings, weekend getaways to cabins I didn't know existed. Last month, she called me, voice bright and buzzing the way it gets when she's already committed to something without asking. Nora, you have to come with me to the coast. 2 nights. My treat. We'll decompress. I groaned. The coast in early spring means cold wind and gray water, the kind of trip that sounds better in theory than practice. But Sloane has a way of making you feel like you're wasting your life if you say no. Fine, I said. But I'm bringing my laptop. She laughed. Of course you are. Sloane's father, Severin, is 52. I've known him since I was 19, back when Sloane and I met in a design elective and bonded over hating the same pretentious classmate. He's always been hard to read. Not distant, exactly, but not the warm, approachable dad type either. He's an architect, the kind who designs museums and libraries, buildings that feel like they're holding their breath. He's got salt and pepper hair, always neatly trimmed, and these pale gray eyes that seem to absorb more than they give. I remember him picking Sloane up from campus once, idling outside in a black Audi, classical music leaking from the cracked window. He nodded at me when I waved. That was it. Just a nod. But I remembered it. He's handsome in that controlled, severe way, sharp jaw, measured gestures, the kind of man who wears wool coats in autumn and looks like he stepped out of a European film. I never thought much about him beyond Sloane's dad. He was just there. Polite. Reserved. Off-limits in a way you don't question. Or at least I didn't. Not until Sloane cancelled. She texted me 2 days before the trip, "Dad, emergency at work. Major client meltdown. Can't get away. I'm so sorry." I stared at the message, already resigned to losing my deposit on the Airbnb. Then my phone rang. Severin. Nora. His voice was calm, deliberate, the way it always was. Sloane mentioned you'd be disappointed. I'm driving up to Cannon Beach this weekend, inspecting a build site near there. If you'd still like to go, I can take you. Separate rooms, of course. I'll be working most of the time anyway. I should have said no. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. But the alternative was staying home alone, refreshing my inbox, waiting for client feedback that wouldn't come till Monday. And it wasn't weird, not really. Severin had always been safe. Appropriate. He was offering a favor, not asking for anything. Okay, I said. That'd be great. Thank you. Good, he said. I'll pick you up Friday at noon. The line went dead before I could second guess it. We left Portland on a Friday afternoon, the sky already bruised with clouds. Severin's Audi smelled like leather and faint cologne, something woodsy, expensive, the kind of scent that lingers on wool. He drove with both hands on the wheel, his posture exact, and I sat in the passenger seat pretending to read emails on my phone. The conversation was light at first. He asked about my work. I asked about his project. We talked about Sloane, about how she'd probably find a way to make us feel guilty for going without her. But the silences were long. Not awkward, just present. I noticed things I shouldn't have. The way his fingers tapped the wheel at red lights. The way he breathed, slow and measured, like he was always thinking 3 steps ahead. The way he glanced at me once when I laughed at something on my phone, his mouth almost curving into a smile before he looked back at the road. By the time we hit Highway 26, the rain had started. Soft at first. Then harder. Looks like we're in for it, he said, his voice low, almost to himself. I glanced out the window. The trees were disappearing into mist, the road narrowing, the sky pressed down like a hand. Should we pull over? I asked. He shook his head. We're almost to Elsie. There's a turnoff there. We'll wait it out if it gets worse. But it got worse fast. The rain turned violent, sheets of it slamming the windshield, the wipers useless against the flood. Thunder cracked so close I felt it in my chest. The road vanished under a curtain of water. And then the car died. Just stopped. Severin tried the ignition twice. Nothing. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. We need to get off the road. I looked out into the storm, my heart thudding. Where? He pointed through the rain-blurred window. There, barely visible through the trees, was a structure. Low, dark, half swallowed by the forest. There, he said. It's our only option. We ran. The rain hit like fists, cold and mean, soaking through my jacket in seconds. My boots slipped on mud and pine needles, and I barely registered Severin's hand on my elbow, steadying me as we stumbled toward the building. It was an old relay station, long abandoned, windows boarded, roof sagging, but the door gave when Severin shoved it open. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Still. Silent. Waiting. I stood there, dripping, shaking, my breath coming in sharp gasps. Severin closed the door behind us. The storm screamed outside, but in here, it was just us. And the cold. And the slow, creeping realization that we weren't leaving anytime soon. He looked at me, really looked, for the first time all day. We'll have to keep each other warm, he said. Not a question. Not an apology. A fact. And I nodded. Because what else was I going to do? That moment, standing in that cold, abandoned relay station, water dripping from my hair, Severin's words hanging in the air like a verdict, that's when I realized I'd been lying to myself from the moment I agreed to this trip. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. To the drive. To the 2 hours before the storm hit, when I still believed this was just a favor, just a ride, just nothing. That's where it really started. Not in the storm. In the silence before it. Severin picked me up at noon, exactly as he'd promised. I was waiting on the curb with my overnight bag when the black Audi pulled up, sleek and quiet like everything about him. He got out to help with my bag, unnecessary, but I didn't stop him. His movements were economical, precise. No wasted motion. Ready? He asked, opening the passenger door. I nodded, sliding into the leather seat that still held the faint warmth of the morning sun. The first 30 minutes were easy. Safe. We talked about Sloane, how she'd texted us both separately with elaborate apologies and promises to make it up to us. We laughed about her dramatics, about how she'd probably already planned a makeup trip we hadn't agreed to yet. She gets that from her mother, Severin said, his voice carrying something I couldn't quite name. Not quite sadness. Not quite nostalgia. Just, wait. I didn't ask about Sloane's mother. I knew she'd died when Sloane was 16. Cancer. Sloane rarely talked about her, and I'd learned not to push. She's lucky to have you, I said instead. He glanced at me, just briefly, before returning his eyes to the road. I'm not sure she'd agree with that. The comment hung there, unfinished, and I didn't know how to respond. So I looked out the window and let the silence fill the space between us. That's when I started noticing things I shouldn't have. The way his hands rested on the steering wheel, left hand at 9 o'clock, right hand draped casually at 3. Long fingers, clean nails, a watch with a leather band that looked expensive but understated. When he shifted gears, his wrist flexed, and I found myself watching the movement like it meant something. His breathing. Steady. Measured. The kind of breathing that suggested perpetual control, like he'd trained himself never to be caught off guard. The way he occasionally glanced at the rearview mirror, adjusting it by millimeters even though nothing had changed. I told myself I was just bored. That my mind was wandering because there was nothing else to focus on. But that wasn't true. I was hyper-aware of him. Of the space between us. Of the fact that we were alone in a way we'd never been before. You're quiet, he said, breaking the silence somewhere past Hillsborough. Just thinking, I said. About? I hesitated. Work. Deadlines. The usual. It was a lie. I wasn't thinking about work at all. You should take a real break, he said. Sloane worries about you. Says you never stop working. Sloane worries about everyone, I said, deflecting. It's her default setting. Maybe. He paused. But she's not wrong. There was something in his tone, not judgment, but concern. The kind that feels personal even when it shouldn't. What about you? I asked, turning the conversation back to him. Do you ever take real breaks? He smiled faintly, his eyes still on the road. I'm taking one now. This is work for you, I pointed out. You said you're inspecting a build site. True. Another pause. But I'm also here. The way he said here, like it meant something more than geography, made my chest tighten. I looked out the window again, watching the trees blur past, trying to ignore the fact that my pulse had quickened. Nothing is happening, I told myself. Asterisk, this is just a drive. But then the sky changed. It started subtly, a dimming, like someone had turned down the brightness on the world. The clouds thickened, pressing lower, darker. The wind picked up, bending the trees at strange angles. Looks like weather's moving in, Severin said, his voice still calm but with an edge of focus now. I checked my phone. No service. We were too far into the mountains. Should we turn back? I asked. We're closer to the coast than Portland now, he said. We'll push through. The rain started as a whisper, light drops speckling the windshield. Then heavier. Then relentless. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and threatening. I felt my chest tighten, not from fear of the storm, but from something else. Something I couldn't name. Severin's jaw tightened. His hands adjusted on the wheel, gripping tighter now. It's fine, he said, though I wasn't sure if he was reassuring me or himself. The wipers worked furiously, but the rain was coming too fast. The road ahead blurred into gray. And then the sky cracked open. Thunder exploded so close I flinched, and the rain became a wall, violent, blinding, erasing everything. The car lurched. The engine sputtered. And then, nothing. Silence, except for the roar of the storm. Severin tried the ignition. Once. Twice. Dead. He looked at me, his gray eyes sharp and steady despite the chaos outside. We need to move, he said. Now. We sat in the dead car for maybe 30 seconds, but it felt longer. The rain hammered the roof like it was trying to break through. The windshield was a sheet of water, the world beyond it erased completely. Severin pulled out his phone. No signal. He tried the ignition one more time, nothing. His jaw worked, but his voice stayed level. We can't stay here. The road's flooding. I looked out my window. He was right. Water was already pooling on the asphalt, rushing past us in dark streams. The shoulder had disappeared entirely, swallowed by mud and rain. Where do we go? My voice came out thinner than I wanted. He pointed through the passenger window, into the trees. There. I saw something when we pulled over. A structure. I squinted through the rain-blurred glass. At first, I saw nothing. Then, barely visible through the downpour, a dark shape. Low. Angular. Man-made. Are you sure? No, he said, already unbuckling his seatbelt. But we don't have a choice. The moment I stepped out of the car, the storm hit me like a physical force. The rain was ice-cold, soaking through my jacket in seconds. The wind screamed through the trees, bending them at impossible angles. I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Severin's hand closed around my elbow, firm, grounding, and he pulled me forward. Stay close, he said, his voice barely audible over the roar. We stumbled off the road, into the forest. The ground was treacherous, slick mud, hidden roots, branches whipping at my face. My boots lost traction twice, and both times Severin's grip kept me upright. I didn't know how he could see where he was going. Everything looked the same, dark, wet, hostile. But he moved with purpose, navigating through the chaos like he'd already mapped it in his mind. And then the structure emerged from the rain. It was an old relay station, small, squat, half-rotted. The kind of building that gets abandoned and forgotten. The windows were boarded, the roof sagging, but the walls were still standing. Severin let go of my arm and shoved his shoulder against the door. It didn't budge. He tried again, harder, and the wood splintered. The door swung inward with a groan. Inside, he said. I didn't hesitate. The air inside was colder than I expected. Still. Silent in a way that felt unnatural after the violence of the storm. The rain pounded the roof, but in here it was muffled, distant, like we'd stepped into a different world. I stood there, dripping, my teeth already starting to chatter. My jacket was useless, soaked through, clinging to my skin like a second layer of ice. My hair hung in wet ropes around my face, and I could feel water pooling in my boots. Severin closed the door behind us, shutting out the storm. For a moment, we just stood there in the dim light filtering through cracks in the boarded windows. The station was small, one room, maybe 12 by 12. A rusted metal shelf lined one wall. A wooden bench sat beneath the window. In the corner, an old wood stove, blackened with age. There was a stack of what looked like emergency supplies, a moth-eaten blanket, a few cans of food, a box of matches. Someone had used this place before. Maybe for exactly this reason. We'll be okay, Severin said, but his voice was tight now. Controlled, but barely. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop the shaking. It wasn't working. The cold was patient, invasive, settling into my bones. Nora. His voice was closer now. I turned and found him watching me, his gray eyes sharp with assessment. You're soaking wet. You need to get out of that jacket. I'm fine, I said automatically, even though I wasn't. You're not. He stepped closer, his presence filling the small space. Hypothermia doesn't ask permission. Take it off. I hesitated, then peeled off my jacket. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the zipper. Severin took it from me and draped it over the bench. He shrugged out of his own coat, a heavy wool thing that had somehow kept him drier than I was, and held it out. Put this on. You'll freeze, I said. I'll manage. His tone left no room for argument. I took the coat. It was warm from his body, and the relief was immediate. I pulled it tight around my shoulders, drowning in the fabric, and for a moment I couldn't think about anything except how much warmer I felt. Severin moved to the wood stove, opening the small door and inspecting the inside. There's still kindling. If I can get this going, we'll have heat. I watched him work, efficient, methodical, like he'd done this 100 times before. He struck a match, coaxed the kindling to catch, and within minutes, a small flame was crackling in the stove. But the cold was still there. Waiting. Persistent. I sat on the bench, hugging his coat around me, and tried to pretend I wasn't terrified. Not of the storm. Not of being stranded. Of being here. Alone. With him. Severin stood by the stove, warming his hands, then turned to face me. His eyes met mine, and for the first time all day, there was no distance in them. No politeness. Just clarity. The fire will help, he said. But it's not enough. We're both wet, and the temperature's dropping. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He crossed the small room and sat beside me on the bench. Close. Closer than he needed to be. We'll have to keep each other warm, he said quietly. Not a question. Not an apology. A statement of fact. And I knew, in that moment, that everything I'd told myself about this trip, about him, about us, about what this was, had just become a lie I could no longer pretend to believe. The cold didn't announce itself. It just settled in, patient and methodical, like it had all the time in the world. It crept through the gaps in the boarded windows, seeped up from the floorboards, wrapped around us with the kind of certainty that made resistance feel pointless. The fire helped. But not enough. Severin sat beside me on the bench, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. He draped the moth-eaten blanket over both our laps, and his arm rested along the back of the bench, not touching me, but present. Available. Lean in, he said quietly. It's not a suggestion. I hesitated. My body was already responding to his proximity, warmth pooling where his shoulder nearly touched mine, awareness prickling along my spine, but my mind was still trying to maintain some semblance of boundary. Nora. His voice was firmer now, patient but insistent. Your lips are turning blue. Stop being stubborn. I shifted closer. Just slightly. Just enough that our sides pressed together. It wasn't enough. He exhaled, something between frustration and resignation, and pulled me against him. His arm came around my shoulders, drawing me into his side, and suddenly I was enveloped. His chest against my shoulder. His warmth bleeding into me through the layers of wet clothing and his wool coat. I stopped shaking. Not immediately. But gradually, like my body was remembering what warmth felt like. We didn't speak. The silence wasn't empty. It was dense, layered with things neither of us was saying. The storm raged outside, thunder rolling across the mountains, rain hammering the roof in relentless waves, but in here, the quiet felt louder. I became aware of everything. The way his breathing slowed mine. Deep. Steady. Like my lungs were learning his rhythm. The way his hand rested on my upper arm, his thumb barely moving, just the slightest pressure, grounding me. The way I fit against him. Too easily. Too naturally. I told myself this was necessity. Survival. That bodies don't care about context when they're cold. That this meant nothing. But my body wasn't listening. It was leaning further into him. Relaxing in ways I didn't give it permission to. Noticing the way his jaw tensed when I shifted, the way his breathing changed, just barely, when my head tilted against his shoulder. How long do you think we'll be here? I asked, my voice quiet, almost swallowed by the storm. Until it passes, he said. Could be an hour. Could be longer. I nodded, but something in me twisted. Not dread. Something worse. Relief. I didn't want to be rescued yet. The thought arrived unbidden, unwelcome, and I tried to push it away. But it lingered, settling into the space between us like a third presence. This felt wrong. It had to feel wrong. He was Sloane's father. 25 years older than me. A man I'd known for nearly a decade as someone off limits, someone safe in his distance. But it didn't feel wrong. It felt safe in a different way. Like I'd been cold for years and hadn't realized it until now. "You're thinking too loud," Severin said, his voice low, almost amused. I tilted my head to look at him. His face was closer than I'd realized. The firelight caught the sharp line of his jaw, the silver threading through his hair, the pale intensity of his eyes. "I'm not thinking anything," I lied. "Yes, you are." His gaze held mine, unflinching. "You're wondering if this is a mistake." My breath caught. "Is it?" He didn't answer right away. His thumb moved again on my arm, deliberate this time, a slow stroke that sent heat pooling in places the cold hadn't touched. "I don't know yet," he said finally. "But I know we're here. And I know you're not shaking anymore." It wasn't an answer. But it was something. Outside, the thunder cracked closer, violent enough to rattle the walls. I flinched, and his arm tightened around me, instinctive, protective. "It's just noise," he murmured. But it didn't feel like just noise. It felt like the storm was matching the pressure building inside this small room, inside the space between us that kept shrinking no matter how still we sat. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on anything else. The sound of the rain. The crackle of the fire. The smell of damp wood and old dust. But all I could feel was him. The solidity of his chest. The warmth of his hand. The way his breath stirred my hair. And the slow, terrifying realization that I didn't want him to let go. "Severin," I said, my voice barely audible. I didn't know what I was going to say. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But before I could speak, his hand moved from my arm to my hair, just briefly, his fingers brushing through the damp strands, tucking them behind my ear. It was such a small gesture. Practical, even. But it felt like a question. And I didn't pull away. That's when I knew. This wasn't about the cold anymore. This wasn't about survival. Something had shifted. Something fundamental. And I couldn't pretend I didn't feel it. I opened my eyes and found him watching me, his expression unreadable but his gaze steady. "You should rest," he said quietly. "We might be here a while." I nodded, but I didn't close my eyes again. Because I knew, somewhere deep and undeniable, that when I walked out of this place, I wouldn't be the same person who walked in. This was changing me. And I wasn't sure I wanted it to stop. Time moved strangely in that room. Minutes stretched and collapsed. The fire burned lower, and Severin added more wood without letting go of me. We'd stopped pretending there was distance between us. I was tucked against him now, my head resting in the hollow of his shoulder, his arm a steady weight around me. The storm hadn't let up. If anything, it had intensified, like it was holding us here deliberately. "Can I ask you something?" I said into the quiet. "Yes." "Do you ever feel like you're just going through the motions? Like you're performing a life instead of living one?" He was quiet for a long moment. I thought maybe he wouldn't answer. Then his chest rose with a deep breath. "Every day," he said. "Since Catherine died." Catherine. Sloane's mother. He never talked about her. Sloane said he'd shut down after the funeral, buried himself in work, became even more unreachable than before. "Sloane worries about you," I said carefully. "I know." His voice carried something raw now, unguarded. "But I don't know how to explain to her that I'm not sad anymore. I'm just empty. I go to work. I come home. I design buildings that other people will fill with life. And I feel nothing." His honesty cut through me. I lifted my head to look at him, and his eyes met mine, no walls, no careful distance. Just exhaustion. "You're not empty," I said. "How would you know?" "Because empty people don't notice things." I paused, my heart thudding. "You notice everything." Something shifted in his expression. His gaze dropped to my mouth, then back to my eyes. "So do you," he said quietly. "You've been watching me since we got in the car. Don't think I didn't notice." Heat flooded my face. I should have denied it. Should have pulled away. Instead, I said, "I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did." His voice was softer now, but there was an edge to it. Not anger. Something closer to restraint breaking. "And I've been trying very hard not to watch you back." My breath caught. "Severin. Don't." His hand moved from my shoulder to my face, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "Don't say whatever you're about to say to talk us both out of this." "Out of what?" I whispered. He didn't answer. His eyes held mine, searching for something, permission, maybe, or confirmation that I felt it too. The storm screamed outside, and I realized it wasn't holding us hostage. It was giving us permission. "I felt invisible for so long," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "Like I'm just taking up space. Going through my own motions. And I thought that was fine. I thought that was safe. And now? Now I don't feel invisible." My voice broke slightly. "And it's terrifying." His thumb stilled on my jaw. "Why?" "Because I don't know what happens when someone actually sees you. When you're not just a role or a function. When you're just yourself. And it's enough." Something in his expression cracked. The careful control he'd maintained since we walked into this place, maybe since I'd known him, finally gave way. "Nora," he said, my name rough in his throat. "You have no idea how long I've been trying not to see you." The words hung between us, irreversible. And then he kissed me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was quiet. Deliberate. Devastatingly intentional. His lips pressed against mine with a certainty that made my chest ache. Not taking, not claiming, just stating something that had been true for longer than either of us had admitted. I kissed him back, my hand finding the front of his shirt, gripping the damp fabric like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. His hand slid into my hair, cradling the back of my head, and the kiss deepened, still slow, still controlled, but weighted with years of restraint finally breaking. I tasted rain on his lips. Felt the rough stubble of his jaw against my palm when I reached up to touch his face. Heard the low sound he made when I pressed closer, erasing whatever space remained between us. It should have felt wrong. It should have felt reckless. But it didn't. It felt like the first honest thing I'd done in years. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us moved far. Our foreheads rested together, our breathing uneven, the firelight casting shadows across his face. I waited for euphoria. For some rush of victory or release. But there was only awareness. Sharp. Undeniable. Irreversible. We had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Severin's hand was still in my hair, his thumb brushing against my temple. His eyes were closed, his jaw tight like he was trying to hold something back. "Say something," I whispered. He opened his eyes. The look in them wasn't regret. But it wasn't relief either. It was recognition. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "I know." "Sloane." "I know," I said again, though saying her name felt like a door slamming shut on something we'd just opened. His hand dropped from my hair, but he didn't pull away. We sat there, still close, still touching, the reality of what we'd just done settling over us like a weight. The storm raged on outside. But inside, the silence had returned. And it wasn't neutral anymore. It was full of everything we'd just done, and everything we couldn't take back. I looked at him, and he looked at me, and I understood, finally, what people meant when they said a moment could ruin you. Not because it destroyed you. But because it showed you a version of yourself you could never unsee. And now I knew. I knew what it felt like to be wanted by someone who had every reason not to want me. I knew what it felt like to want someone I had no right to want. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would never be the same. The knock on the door came like a gunshot. 3 sharp raps that shattered the quiet we'd been holding on to. I flinched, my body jerking away from Severance instinctively. He was already moving, standing, creating distance between us with a speed that felt rehearsed. "Search and rescue," a voice called from outside. "Anyone in there?" Severin crossed to the door and opened it. 2 rangers stood in the rain, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The storm had eased to a steady downpour, no longer the violent wall it had been. "We're okay," Severin said, his voice perfectly level, perfectly composed. Like he hadn't just kissed me. Like the last 2 hours hadn't happened. Car stalled on the road. "We took shelter here." "You're lucky," one of the rangers said, a woman with a weathered face and kind eyes. "This storm came out of nowhere. Roads are a mess, but they're passable now. We can get you back to your vehicle, see if we can get it started or arrange a tow." "Thank you," Severin said. "We appreciate it." I stood frozen by the bench, Severin's coat still wrapped around my shoulders. The ranger's flashlight swept across the room, landing on me briefly before moving on. "Ma'am? You all right?" I found my voice. "Yes. I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. I watched Severin move through the motions, thanking the rangers, gathering our wet jackets, extinguishing the fire we'd built. He didn't look at me. Not once. The woman ranger smiled. "You two did the right thing, finding shelter. Hypothermia's no joke up here." "We kept each other warm," Severin said flatly. The words that had sounded so intimate hours ago now felt clinical. Factual. Empty. The walk back to the car was surreal. The rangers led the way with their flashlights, and Severin and I followed in silence. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the forest looked different now, less hostile, just ordinary woods and bad weather. I wanted to say something. Anything. But Severin walked 3 feet ahead of me, his posture rigid, his focus fixed on the path. When we reached the Audi, one of the rangers tried the ignition. It turned over on the first try. "Probably just flooded," he said. "You should be good to go now." Severin shook their hands, thanked them again. Professional. Distant. Like he was conducting a business transaction. I slid into the passenger seat, numb. The drive back was worse than the storm. Severin drove with both hands on the wheel, his eyes locked on the road. The silence between us wasn't comfortable anymore. It was suffocating. I stared out the window, watching the trees blur past, replaying everything in my head. The way he'd held me. The way he'd looked at me. The way he'd kissed me like it meant something. Had it meant something? Or had I imagined the weight of it? We were 20 minutes outside Portland when he finally spoke. "This stays where it happened." His voice was quiet. Final. I turned to look at him, but he didn't take his eyes off the road. "Do you understand?" he asked. My throat tightened. "Yes. Sloan can never know." "I know. We were stranded. We kept warm. That's all that happened." I nodded, even though he wasn't looking. "That's all that happened." He exhaled, something loosening in his shoulders. Like I'd given him the answer he needed. "Good," he said. And that was it. We didn't speak again for the rest of the drive. He dropped me off in front of my building just after 9. The rain had stopped completely, and the streets were slick and shining under the streetlights. "Thank you," I said, reaching for the door handle. "For the ride." "For everything." He nodded once. Still not looking at me. I got out, grabbed my bag from the back seat, and closed the door. The Audi pulled away before I reached the building entrance. I stood there on the sidewalk, watching his taillights disappear into the city, and felt something crack open inside my chest. I told myself I meant it when I agreed. This stays where it happened. I told myself it was the right thing. The only thing. I told myself I could go back to who I was before the drive, before the storm, before his mouth on mine. I told myself I'd be fine. But even as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, even as I dropped my bag by the door and peeled off my damp clothes, even as I stood under the hot shower trying to wash away the cold, I knew I was lying. Because some things don't stay anywhere. They follow you. And I could already feel it, the weight of what we'd done, the ghost of his touch, the way my body still remembered the shape of him against me. I toweled off, pulled on clean clothes, and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. My phone buzzed. A text from Sloan. OMG, Dad said you guys got caught in the storm. Are you okay? I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I'm fine, I typed. Just glad to be home. I hit send. Another lie. I wasn't fine. And I wasn't home. Some part of me was still in that relay station, pressed against Severin in the firelight, crossing a line I could never uncross. And I didn't know how to get it back. The first week, I convinced myself I was fine. I went back to work. Answered emails. Delivered copy on deadline. My clients noticed nothing different. Why would they? I was the same person I'd always been, efficient, reliable, professional. Except I wasn't. I noticed storms now. Not just the weather, though that too. Every time the sky darkened, every time rain started tapping against my window, my chest would tighten. My body would remember before my mind caught up. The cold. The firelight. His arm around me. I'd stop working and just sit there. Listening. Waiting for thunder that sounded like permission. Sloan called 3 times in the first week. I let it go to voicemail twice. When I finally answered, her voice was bright, concerned, apologetic all at once. Nora. Oh my God, I've been so worried. Dad said you guys barely made it out of that storm. Are you traumatized? Do you need to talk about it? I'm fine, I said, the lie smooth and practiced now. Really? It was just weather. Dad seemed weird about it when I asked him. Like, more quiet than usual. You know how he gets. My stomach clenched. He was probably just tired. Probably. A pause. We should do that trip again. Just us this time. Make up for it. Yeah, I said. Definitely. Let me check my calendar. I never checked my calendar. She invited me to dinner the following week. Then to a gallery opening. Then to Sunday brunch. I found reasons to say no every time. Work deadline. Migraine. Out of town. She stopped asking after the 4th excuse. I stopped dating without realizing I was doing it. There was a guy, Marcus, from a coffee shop I frequented. He'd been flirting with me for months, and 2 weeks after the storm, he finally asked for my number. I gave it to him. He texted. Asked me to dinner. I stared at the message for 20 minutes before typing, sorry, really busy right now. Rain check? There was no rain check. Because when I tried to imagine sitting across from him, making small talk, laughing at his jokes, all I could think about was how wrong it would feel. How his voice wouldn't have that measured control. How his hands wouldn't move with that deliberate precision. How he wouldn't see me the way Severin had. So I didn't go. The sensitivity came in waves. Certain sounds. Certain silences. I'd be working, focused, and then I'd hear a man's voice in the hallway, low, controlled, and my pulse would spike. I'd look up, half expecting to see him standing there. It never was. I started noticing men who looked like him. Same build. Same salt and pepper hair. Same severe elegance. I'd stare until they turned, and it would be a stranger's face. The disappointment was visceral. My phone became an object of torture. Every notification made my heart jump. Every unknown number made me hold my breath. But Severin never called. Never texted. Nothing. I told myself that was good. That was right. We'd agreed. This stays where it happened. But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd scroll through my texts anyway, looking for something that wasn't there. Some proof that it had mattered. That I hadn't imagined the weight of it. One night, 3 weeks after the storm, I almost texted him. "Do you think about it?" My thumb hovered over send for a full minute. Then I deleted it. I started noticing the fracture. There was the Nora from before, the one who kept her distance, who controlled her world through careful boundaries, who believed she was fine alone. And then there was the Nora who'd existed in that relay station, unguarded, seen, wanted in a way that felt like being remembered after years of forgetting. I didn't know how to reconcile them. The before Nora felt like a stranger now. Her life, my life, didn't fit anymore. The work felt hollow. The routines felt performative. The carefully maintained walls felt less like safety and more like a prison. But I didn't know how to be the other version either. The one who'd let herself be held. Who'd kissed a man she had no right to kiss. Who'd felt alive for the first time in years and then had to pretend it never happened. So I existed somewhere between them. Not moving forward. Not going back. Just, haunted. 5 weeks after the storm, I came home to find a package outside my door. No return address. No markings except my name and apartment number, written in precise, architectural handwriting. My hand shook as I picked it up. I knew before I opened it. Inside, folded with meticulous care, was his coat. The wool coat he'd draped over my shoulders in the relay station. The one I'd worn while his arm held me close. The one that had smelled like him, cedar and rain and something I couldn't name. It had been cleaned. Pressed. And in the inside pocket, a note. I pulled it out with trembling fingers, my heart hammering against my ribs. The handwriting was his. Precise. Controlled. Some moments don't end. They just go quiet. That was all. No signature. No explanation. No invitation. Just those 2 lines. I stood in my doorway, holding his coat, reading those words over and over until they blurred. And I realized, with a clarity that felt like falling, that I'd been lying to myself from the beginning. This wasn't over. It had never been over. It had just been waiting. I brought the coat inside and closed the door behind me like I was smuggling contraband. My apartment felt too small suddenly. Too bright. Too ordinary for what I was holding. I set the package on my kitchen counter and just stared at it. The coat was folded so precisely it looked like it had never been worn. Like it hadn't absorbed my body heat for hours while a storm raged outside. Like it hadn't been the barrier between survival and hypothermia, between restraint and everything that came after. But it had been all those things. And now it was here. In my home. Proof. I unfolded it slowly, the wool soft under my fingers. It still smelled faintly of cedar, though the rain and cold were gone. Someone, him, had taken care with this. Had it cleaned. Had it pressed. Had folded it with the same precision he brought to everything. Had written that note and tucked it in the pocket where his hand had rested against my ribs. I pulled the note out again, even though I'd already memorized it. Some moments don't end. They just go quiet. I read it 5 times. 10 times. Looking for subtext, for hidden meaning, for anything beyond the words themselves. But there was nothing else. Just the truth, stated simply. He was telling me he remembered. He was telling me it mattered. He was telling me he felt it too, the way that night had carved itself into us, refusing to fade. But he wasn't asking me to do anything about it. He wasn't offering anything. He was just acknowledging it. And somehow, that was worse than silence. I put the coat on. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to feel it again. Maybe I needed to confirm that it was real, that the night had been real, that I hadn't invented the intimacy in my desperate, lonely mind. It swallowed me the way it had in the relay station, too big, heavy with warmth, smelling like him. I sat on my couch, wrapped in it, and closed my eyes. And I was back there. The cold. The fire. His arm around me. His hand in my hair. His mouth on mine. The version of myself who had existed in that space, unguarded, seen, wanted, she was still there. Trapped in that moment. Waiting. And I finally understood. This wasn't denial. What Severin had been doing, the silence, the distance, the careful avoidance, it wasn't pretending it didn't happen. It was containment. He was keeping it locked in that relay station, in that storm, because letting it out would destroy everything. His relationship with Sloane. His carefully controlled life. The boundaries that kept him functional. He'd sent the coat not to reopen the door, but to let me know he was standing on the other side of it. Still there. Still feeling it. Still changed. I realized something else too. The obsession that had been building in me for 5 weeks, it wasn't really about him. It was about her. The woman I'd been in that storm. The one who'd leaned into his touch instead of pulling away. Who'd told the truth about her invisibility. Who'd kissed him knowing exactly what it meant. She was braver than I'd ever been. More honest. More alive. And now I knew she existed, that version of me, and I didn't know how to go back to pretending she didn't. I didn't know how to return to the small, controlled life I'd built. The one where I kept everyone at arm's length and called it safety. Where I performed competence and called it fulfillment. Because I'd tasted something different. I'd been seen. Wanted. Met with the same intensity I'd been hiding for years. And now everything else felt like a lie. I should have wanted closure. That's what you're supposed to want, right? Clean endings. Clear answers. The ability to move on. But sitting there in his coat, holding his note, I realized something that should have terrified me. I didn't want closure. I didn't want him to call and apologize and say it was a mistake. I didn't want to have some mature conversation where we agreed it could never happen again. I didn't want to let it go. Because letting it go meant letting her go, the woman I'd been in that moment. And I wasn't ready to do that. Maybe I never would be. I folded the note carefully and put it back in the coat pocket. Then I hung the coat in my closet, tucked in the back where I wouldn't see it every day but where I'd know it was there. Waiting. Like the night itself. Like the version of me who still lived in it. My phone sat on the counter, silent. Mocking me with its lack of messages. I could text him. Thank him for the coat. Ask him what it meant. Ask him if he thought about it as much as I did. But I didn't. Because I already knew the answer. Some moments don't end. They just go quiet. He'd given me everything I needed to know. We were both trapped in that night. Both changed by it. Both carrying it forward into lives that no longer fit. The difference was, he'd accepted the haunting. And I was still trying to figure out if I wanted to be exorcised. Or if I wanted to stay possessed. I looked at the coat hanging in my closet, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace. Not resolution. Just recognition. This was my life now. Before the storm. And after. And I was never going back. It's been 3 years. I still hear thunder differently. Not as danger. Not as weather. As a reminder that there are versions of us that only exist when everything else falls away, and once you meet them, you don't forget. You just learn how to live haunted. I never saw Severin again. Not in person, anyway. Sloane and I drifted apart slowly, the way friendships do when one person is holding a secret too heavy to carry in the same room. She never asked why I stopped coming around. Maybe she knew. Maybe she didn't want to know. I heard about him occasionally. Through mutual acquaintances. Through the architecture blogs I still followed without meaning to. He designed a library in Seattle. Won an award. Sloan posted a photo of him at the ceremony, silver hair, sharp suit, that same controlled composure. I stared at that photo for longer than I should have. Wondering if he still thought about it. Knowing he did. I moved out of Portland 2 years ago. Not running, exactly. Just allowing myself to be somewhere new. I'm in Ashland now, a smaller city, quieter. I still write copy, but I take more time with it. I say no to clients who don't feel right. I've learned that having boundaries doesn't mean being closed off, it means knowing what you actually want instead of just protecting yourself from everything. That night taught me the difference. I date now. Cautiously. Honestly. I don't compare everyone to him, not consciously, but I notice what's missing. The intensity. The restraint. The feeling of being chosen by someone who had every reason not to choose you. Most men feel lighter. Easier. Less dangerous. I'm okay with that now. Because I understand something I didn't before, some people aren't meant to be kept. They're meant to show you what it feels like to be fully seen, once, so you know what to look for in everyone who comes after. Even if what comes after never quite matches. I still have the coat. It's in my closet in Ashland, hanging in the back. I've never worn it again, but I've never thrown it away either. Sometimes, on nights when the rain is heavy and the thunder rolls through the valley, I take it out. I hold it. I remember. Not with longing, exactly. Not with regret. Just with acknowledgement. This happened. This was real. This changed me. The note is still in the pocket, the paper soft now from being unfolded and refolded too many times. Some moments don't end. They just go quiet. He was right. It never ended. It just went quiet. And I've learned to live in that quiet. I think about her sometimes, the woman I was in that relay station. The one who stopped pretending she was fine. Who admitted she felt invisible. Who leaned into the terrifying intimacy of being wanted without conditions. She's still part of me. Maybe the truest part. But she doesn't run my life anymore. She doesn't need to. She showed me what I was capable of feeling. What I deserved. What it meant to be met, really met, by another person. And then she let me go. Or maybe I let her go. I'm not sure it matters. Last month, I saw someone who looked like him. Walking through the plaza downtown, wool coat, silver hair, that same deliberate stride. My breath caught. My chest tightened. I almost called out. But then he turned, and it wasn't him. Just a stranger who shared the same architecture. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the almost, the echo, the ghost. And then I kept walking. Because that's what you do when you're haunted. You acknowledge the presence. You honor what it meant. And then you keep moving. Not because you've forgotten. But because you've learned that some moments aren't meant to continue. They're meant to mark you. To split your life into before and after. To show you who you become when you stop performing safety and start risking truth. I don't know where Severin is now. What he's building. Whether he still thinks about that night or if he's managed to lock it away more successfully than I have. I don't need to know. Because what I carry isn't about him anymore. It's about what happened when two people, stranded and cold and desperate for something real, decided to stop pretending for just a few hours. It's about being seen and not taken. Wanted and not possessed. Touched and then released. And somehow, that's worse and better than any alternative. Because now I know. I know what it feels like to be chosen by someone who could have walked away. I know what it feels like to kiss someone and feel the world rearrange itself. I know what it feels like to survive something that didn't kill you but changed you so completely you can never explain it to anyone who wasn't there. So yes. I still hear thunder differently. And when the storms come, and they always come, I stop what I'm doing. I listen. And I remember the night I got stranded with my best friend's father and never really came back from it. Not because I'm stuck there, but because some part of me will always be standing in that relay station, wrapped in his coat, learning what it means to be alive. And I've decided that's not a curse. It's just the price of being seen. Once. Completely. By someone who understood that the most profound intimacy isn't about what happens next. It's about what you carry with you when nothing happens next at all. I'm still carrying it. And I think I always will. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe.